Welcome to our December technical training meeting. Thank you guys for joining. Got a few little housekeeping things, and then we'll jump into, we're going to do a little bit of lead training today. And anyway, we'll jump into that in a minute. So let me just go over some housekeeping stuff. Hopefully it'll keep recording. All right. Hopefully you guys all had a good Thanksgiving and you're back at it for the month of December here. We've got a couple of training opportunities that we're aware of. The lead refresher and inspector classes have finally been posted. So if you follow the link, some of you may have received an email from them if you've registered with them in the past. But for some reason, when you get to some of them, you still can't register for them. So anyway, just to be aware of it. If your lead inspector or your lead renovator is going to expire in 2020, you'll want to make sure and sign up for that. There's only one lead inspector refresher class, and I think there's only one lead inspector class. So if you've been waiting to go get your lead inspector class, you'll want to get signed up for that as soon as you can. But as of yesterday, there was no link to actually sign up yet, and their response was that it wasn't online yet. So just watch for that. And the lead inspector stuff is happening in February, so you'll want to jump on that right away. I sent out, I try not to spam you guys with too much stuff, but I did get a newsletter from the Energy Conservatory where they're going to do a blower door basics training on December 11th at noon. So I forwarded that to you last week. If that's something that is of interest to you, check it out, get registered for it. I think they had a BPI CEU credit for that if you sign up, and it is noon Mountain Time, so you could hit it during your lunch hour and get a BPI credit. And then we just listed these national trainings. The National Home Performance Conference is coming up in April in New Orleans, and the Energy Out West Conference for 2020 is going to be in August, and it's in Austin, Texas. So if you have interest in those, kind of plan ahead, plan accordingly. DOE typically sponsors those so that you could use your DOE technical training money to go to some of those conferences. And they tend to have a bunch of CEUs and things for both NATE and for BPI. So anybody aware of any other trainings out there that this group should know about? All right. For new business, first thing I just wanted to give Wade a minute. Wade, are you on?
Yep, I'm here. I'm ready.
You want to just tell us where we're at? So last month you spent some time actually explaining this whole JTA testing, or these tests that everybody's going to have to take. Can you just give us a quick update on when they can expect that and what's going on with that?
Can you give me the screen for a minute? I got a couple of things I'd like to show them.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Maybe I can. I think you've got it.
Can everyone see this PDF with the highlighted writing on it?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so we've been talking about the required JTA training and assessments and stuff that DOE has put out. It's all part of the Tier 1 training we've been talking about. So we are gearing up to get the first stage of that going, and it's going to be the knowledge assessments. And so I want to go over just some of this with you a little bit. In particular, this one. This is the one that's up is the JTAs for what they call retrofit installer and crew leader. And they have combined them into one all-encompassing JTA. I'm just going to go ahead and read the highlighted part for you. So it says, it was decided that the retrofit installer technician and crew leader JTAs would be combined into one comprehensive crew leader JTA. Combining the two JTAs stem from the fact that crew leaders regularly perform the same tasks as retrofit installers, and crew leaders must be able to train retrofit installers in addition to the crew leader's supervisory tasks. Therefore, all knowledge and tasks that apply to retrofit installers apply to crew leaders. So if you're a crew leader or a retrofit installer, your initial assessment that you'll take on the LMS will be titled retrofit installer / crew leader. They continue to go on to talk about the solution was to include the retrofit installer role within the comprehensive crew leader JTA through the development of the RIT badges. We've talked about the badging system with all of the coordinators. I think we've mentioned it on maybe some of the technical meetings. We've asked some of the coordinators to try to start implementing the badges because there's different areas that we have to assess. So I'm going to kind of show you what it's all about. So here's an example. As a crew leader or a retrofit installer, you have to have knowledge of the following items. Well, we can assess knowledge with a simple online multiple choice exam, and that's our intention, is to begin with the knowledge assessments. So a multiple choice question or anything like that, if you can answer that correctly, that tells us you have knowledge of these items, okay? The other thing that needs to be assessed, let me go find it here, is ability to do something. So the ability to do something means that it's something we have to see you do. We're working on ways to put that on the LMS using a program called Captivate so that you can actually go in and move things around and put things where they're supposed to be. Our goal is to minimize the impact to your daily operations and do as much of this as we can on the LMS. We can also use the badging system that we've been talking about, and I've sent that badging system out to all of the coordinators. The badging system basically covers all of the abilities and skills that need to be assessed. And if we go back up here to what NREL has said, the highlighted part, candidates can earn badges in two ways, either on the job via a qualified supervisor or by completing training and tasks at an accredited weatherization assistance program training center. We'd rather see your guys do it out in the field rather than pulling them off the jobs to come up here and do it. That's why we're hoping that some of you have started to implement the badging system and provide us some feedback on it. I've gotten a little bit of feedback from a few of you. So that's kind of where we're going with that. Of course, there's the JTAs for QCI and the JTAs for Energy Auditor. If you have any concerns about what you might need to know to get through the first assessment, the knowledge part, you can go to NREL and download the JTAs for your specific designation. Any questions about that before I show you the LMS component of it?
Nope.
Okay, so when you go to the LMS, once we get it all set up, and our goal is to have this up and ready to go in the next week or two. It's holiday season. I know there's going to be a lot of downtime, so we're hoping your people can get through this during their downtime. But for instance, if you're an energy auditor, you're going to log in and you'll see this, Energy Auditor JTA Knowledge Assessment. It will be a multiple choice quiz. You'll get one attempt at it. Don't panic. It's just to test your knowledge of the subject matter. You know, your job's not on the line or anything crazy like that. It's just we need a data set, a starting point to know how we need to gear our future training. Same with the QCIs. And then this one down here, retrofit installer technician, will be also / crew leader. So this is where we're going to begin with the knowledge assessments, and these are all just multiple choice quizzes. The one caveat is Saturn, who we work with, who hosts the LMS for us, is getting ready to transition and update, because we're currently running on a very outdated version of the LMS hosting system called Moodle. They're getting ready to update that. We're hoping that happens real soon. When that happens, anyone who currently has access to LMS, it will cause you to reset your account. We're going to have a call with the guys from Saturn to figure out all the logistics on that. They're also going to update the content. Any of you that have been on the LMS know very well that the content is dated. It's 10 years old. It's time to update it. So they are working on updating it and making it more relevant to today's standards and JTAs and stuff like that. So once we get it up and running, I will get emails out to everybody with login information, everything you need to know so you can get in and start taking these assessments. Any questions? Okay. Did I miss anything, Matt?
No, that's. I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware. They should see something in their email inbox in the next week or two, so that you'll be able to jump in and take your quiz or your test. So.
Okay. That's all I got. Let me see if I can turn this back over to you now.
But yeah, the switch over with the hosting company might throw a little bit of wrench in the works, but we don't know yet. So, but hopefully in the next week or two, we'll have everything ready to rock and roll. So, all right.
Okay, it should be back over to you.
Cool. So aside from that, I just had that our next technical meeting will be January 7th. So hope you guys, if anybody's taking time off over the holidays, hopefully everybody will be back by January 7th. That'll be the first Tuesday in January. And then the other thing, I just wanted to share this with you guys. Bragg I saw that they had a cool client ed form, and I wanted to show everybody. I think some of you have something like this, but I'm going to attach this to the email that I send out with today's certificate of attendance. So if it's something that would be useful to you, or if you want to make your own version of this, I thought it was a good idea. So they just use this. They've got this client ed sheet, and they basically have a checkbox. So once they've given the client some education on how to run their thermostat, they check the box. How to run their ASHRAE, they check the box. And I can see this. In a former life, I used something like this, and it was really just a great tool to help me to remember to talk about all of the things that I needed the client to know. And so if you feel like this would be a good tool, this is not something that's required, but it would be a really good tool to help you remember, and also a good way to document that, so that you have on record that you actually performed this client education, and hopefully just help whoever's giving the client ed to remember all the things they need to discuss. So anyway, just wanted to share that with you. If you guys have other things that you feel like have really improved how you're doing something, we'd love to hear about them, and we'd like to pass them along to the rest of the group. So anyway, all right, let's move on to our main topic, unless anybody's aware of anything else or has any other questions before we get started on our lead review here. All right. So I feel like I'm missing a slide. There's my slide. Okay, this is what I wanted to cover today. So I want to jump in the guidelines for just a minute. I apologize. I am going to read from the guidelines, but I feel like it's really good to just every once in a while take a minute and read the words out of the guidelines and think about how that applies to what you're doing. There's not a ton in the guidelines about lead, but I'm gonna read through that stuff really quickly, and we'll stop and talk about it. So if anybody has questions as I go through, each paragraph, just interrupt me, or and I ask your questions. Let's talk about what's in the guidelines for a minute. And then the main thing that I want to talk about today is this. We need to improve the way we're documenting our test locations. And I've got a couple examples. I'll show you what that looks like, and at least one way that I feel like we can improve it. I think you guys may have some better ideas, but we'll talk about that for a minute. We'll talk about just some lead testing efficiency strategies, and then Dalton's going to just cover when we do have to do lead RRP. Is that right? Anyway, when we do have to do lead safe stuff, then he'll talk about the documentation that needs to be in the file. So I think for a lot of you, this will be a review. We do have a handful of newer people in the program, though, and some of this may be brand new to you guys. So, and if you have a question or if you learned something along the way, please speak up, because there's some other people who are brand new that might not have run into that issue yet. So here's the stuff in the guidelines. So there's, in section B9.4, there's some stuff that's basically for energy auditors, and it gives them some guidance on how to conduct an audit and what you need to do in the house and what you need to do when you're back in the office. And this is about all there is on lead testing in that section. And so it's pretty general. It just says that lead testing of all painted surfaces that may potentially be disturbed during the weatherization process must be tested in homes that are built or manufactured before 1978. An XRF analyzer must be used to conduct the testing. There are other options, but our program requires the XRF. And then it says the results must be summarized using the lead inspection report. And our guidelines still call it attachment 28. That is the A08 lead inspection report. I think most auditors are aware of that and using it. And the inspection report and a copy of the XRF results shall be included in the audit file. And this one's one that may get forgotten from time to time. The client shall be informed of the testing and the results. So I think most of you are communicating to the clients that you're actually conducting a lead test. But be aware you actually do need to share the results with them. So make sure that you're doing that when you're out doing your client ed. Any questions on the B9 stuff here? All right. The next part, or the next section in the guidelines that addresses lead paint is in the health and safety section, which is section E. And if you'll remember, in the health and safety section, there's kind of for every category, there's 4 subcategories. There's this action and allowability, and then there's testing, and I think client ed, and certification sections. So anyway, we're going to cover the first 2. We're going to just talk about what's allowable or what you're required to do when it comes to lead-based paint, and then the tests that are also required, or the testing section. So this first section, just action and allowability. The first thing it says is that agencies must follow EPA's lead safe renovation, repair, and painting rule, the RRP, when working in pre-1978 housing. We could stop the training right there if you all understood exactly what was in the RRP. But that really is like DOE. They made an attempt. They kind of had their own standard for a little while, but they walked away from that, or walked that backward a little bit, and said, you know what, EPA's standard is great, and we're just going to use theirs. So that is what the whole weatherization program does. We are required to follow the EPA's RRP standard. And that's found in this federal regulation 40 CFR 744 subpart E. If you're looking for it, if you get into the guidelines, into section E, this is a hyperlink to that. And I would encourage you to take some time to read through that. It's a hard read, but if you sit down and really think it through, it's very, very helpful to understand what's in that. And then the next bullet basically just says lead testing on pre-78 homes is allowable as an HSM or as a health and safety measure. And in most cases, that is how you should be dealing with it, specifically when we're talking about weatherization. So lead safe RRP work for ECMs, which are energy conservation measures, so weatherization, shall always be an HSM, charged to health and safety. So this one's kind of important one to remember. I do still see it from time to time. Somebody wants to take some of the cost of the lead safe weatherization and add it to the cost of a window. And we do not do that at all. When you're evaluating a window, you only put in the cost of the window and the materials to install it and the labor to install it. And you run that through the audit. If you get a payback on that, then you replace that window. If that window has lead, then as a separate measure, as a health and safety measure, you're going to put in the cost of doing the RRP to install that window. Any questions on that? This last sentence just points out, and this comes down to other funding sources. If you do install a measure using a different funding source, such as crisis, then the lead safe RRP work is still required, but you're going to include it in the cost of that, the NAM or the what do we call this, crisis CRMs? Yeah. So if it's weatherization, it's going to be a separate health and safety measure. If it's other funding or other program like crisis, then you'll just include it in the cost of the crisis measure. So, questions on that? Okay, this is the rest of this section, just these next 4 or 5 paragraphs. So let me just read through them. Deferral is required when the extent and condition of lead-based paint in the house would potentially create further health and safety hazards. And hiring a lead risk assessor to help make this determination is allowable. So I haven't come across it yet, but you could actually defer a job if you feel like there's no way that weatherization could deal with it because there's too much lead or it's going to create further health and safety hazards. So just be aware of that one. Only those costs directly associated with the testing of lead-safe RRP practices for surfaces directly disturbed during weatherization activities are allowable HSMs. I think sometimes things can be, you think things are pretty obvious, but it was important for us to write that one down. Make sure you're not adding any other costs to those. If you have a HSM for lead-safe RRP, make sure that you're not adding other things in there. Now, if you have, say you have to do some lead-safe RRP on 2 windows and on a door, do you have to write separate health and safety measures for each of those? Can anybody answer that? If you had multiple doors and windows and measures that you're going to do lead-safe RRP on, how many health and safety measures do you need to write? I heard a 1, possibly from Scott. I'm not sure. That is correct. So keep it simple. You can put all of your lead-safe RRP into one measure. You don't have to break it apart any more than that when you're writing the audit. So next one, workers shall follow OSHA standards for PPE for lead-safe RRP work. And the cost of PPE for lead-safe RRP work are allowable health and safety expenses. So if you're out in the field and you're doing lead-safe work, you need to wear all of the OSHA PPE. And if you don't have it, you need to talk to your coordinator and they need to purchase it. And they will charge that to the health and safety funding category. It would never show up on an audit because it's PPE. It's not materials you're going to leave on the house. But make sure you have all of the appropriate equipment that you need to be safe when you're doing this work. Next one, job site. Job site setup and cleaning verification by a certified renovator is required. So, and anybody out there, please correct me if you understand this differently, but my understanding is if your agency has a certified renovator, they can train other people to do lead-safe work who are not renovators, but they still have to do the job site set. They have to do a verification that the job site setup was done properly and that the cleaning was done properly. Is that accurate? Do our guidelines reflect the RRP rule appropriately?
To the best of my knowledge, that is correct.
All right. Everybody else's silence tells me yes, so we'll go with that. No, I'm fairly certain that is the case. I didn't get time to dig back into the certified renovator stuff to verify it, though. So then the last thing was the documentation in the client file must include your certified renovator certification, any training provided on site, and as a certified renovator, you can conduct the training on site. So if you're doing that, you're supposed to document it. Description of specific actions taken, lead testing and assessment documentation, and photos of site and containment setup. And this shall be documented using attachment 28 RRP declaration and checklist. So Dalton will cover that stuff in a few minutes, but that's where it is in the guidelines. So those are the things that are required. The next section covers the testing. So testing to determine the presence of lead paint that will be disturbed by WAP measure installation is required on all pre-1978 housing. So you don't have to test everything in the house. You're just testing stuff that will be disturbed during the weatherization or the crisis work. This test will be conducted with an XRF, and those XRF devices have to have current calibration, certification, and leak test. Dalton, do you want to talk about that for a second?
Sure. So with your XRFs, they're supposed to be leak test every 6 months. And you can get set up with a lab where they'll send you out the swabs. You just swab it down, send it back into them. And we found a couple already this year at some agencies that haven't done their leak tests in over a year or so. So just make sure you're doing that, and then make sure you're checking your calibration every time you go out there to test. And I see that on all your guys' XRF reports, so I can see the pre and post calibration. So
Cool, thank you.
make sure you're doing that.
Any questions or concerns on that? All right, the next one says the lead testing results shall be recorded using the software reports provided by the XRF manufacturer or other agency created form. So you can report them, whatever is easiest and best for you, but we'll talk about what really needs to be in those reports in just a minute. Testing results should include client information, the location, and this is the one where I feel like we are really deficient right now, the location that each test was taken, and the positive or negative results of each building component tested. And a copy of the results has to be in the client file. And the last thing here, agencies will develop an internal process to ensure once a positive result is found that every person working on a job is aware of the presence and location of lead. This process will ensure that both the client and the worker are protected. So this one's really important. We see a mixed bag on how this is done. Does anybody out there want to tell us what your agency does? What's your agency's process to ensure that everybody that touches the job is aware of the presence and location of lead? Any brave anybody out there?
So we just make sure we go over the job in the morning before the employees go out and go over what's going to happen and where the lead is and what needs to be done.
Okay, so you guys are having a team meeting and stuff. Do you guys record it on your work orders or on the lead form, or how do you do it to document it as well?
Work order line item will say if there's replace a window, use lead safe work practices, And so that's on the work order. That'll be documented.
Cool.
We do that, and then we also have a neon sticker that says lead that we stick on the folder and on the measures they have to do it on, just to help draw their attention to it.
What color's your neon sticker?
It's green.
Nice bright green sticker. I like that. Anybody else have anything similar or different? Anyway, make sure that at your agency that you guys have internal processes. If I was out working around lead each day and somebody didn't bother to test the lead and didn't bother to communicate to me where the lead was, and I took that home to my little ones and that caused them a problem, I'd be pretty pissed. So that's really, like, we are protecting our clients when we do this, and we're protecting our workers and their families when we do this. So this is a part of your job that you need to make sure you're taking very seriously. Make sure that you're communicating this to everybody involved. And we're watching for that when we're monitoring. We're making suggestions on improvements for that as well. So There were these two other paragraphs. This one really is just a statement that we don't have to do this thing that that the state of Utah requires, and it's basically because the test would not provide us any good results. And then the last, I apologize, I said it on the last screen, but this is actually the last item. Agencies are responsible to ensure that crews and contractors using lead-safe work are using lead-safe work practices. So you guys are responsible to ensure that your crews and your contractors are actually doing lead-safe work. Lead-safe work practices shall be verified using required photographic documentation along with work-in-progress verification. Dalton, you got anything to say about that one?
Yeah, so as an agency, you should be going and doing some in-progress inspections periodically when your crews are out there doing lead renovation projects, RRP work. You know, one of the ways you make sure they're doing it is their photo documentation, but also some in-progress works. And when you go out there and do an in-progress inspection of lead work, you're going to want to document it, have a form or something that they can fill out and say what job they were at, what measures were being done, and if there was anything that they seen that the crews weren't doing that they should have been doing, that they need to do some training on to improve. So
Cool. Yeah.
It don't say a certain timeline that you have to go, but I would probably, as an agency, at least a couple times a year, go out and do some in-progress lead inspections just to make sure your crews are doing what they're supposed to be.
And this can be hard if your agency doesn't do a lot of lead work. So I feel like that's one we're finding a lot of agencies deficient in. So make sure that you guys that you have somebody responsible to do that and that they're doing it on a regular basis. So, and then the state WAP personnel, we also verify that the agencies are using lead-safe work practices as part of our annual monitoring. So that's all that's in the guidelines. Basically, it just says we follow the EPA's lead rule, and then we spelled out just a few things where you're supposed to use an XRF, you're supposed to document things, you're supposed to verify that these things are happening out in the field. So any questions on anything in the guidelines? Okay. This is the main thing I want to talk about because I'm seeing this is a problem across the board. So there's a dozen other things in this. There's lots of things in the actual lead rule. I just simply pulled out this one thing to focus on it. So in 40 CFR 745.227, it talks about what must be included in a report that's prepared by a lead inspector. And one of the things is that you're supposed to have specific locations of each painted component that was tested. So I pulled together 3 examples. And I just want to show you guys them, and I have a bunch of questions. So this is the part where you guys will speak up and interact, please. Now, if you're the auditor that, if you recognize this as your work, I've taken everybody's names off of this, so you don't have to own this. But I also, please do not feel bad that I grabbed your audit. I literally opened up 3 files that had lead, the very first 3 files that I came across that had lead, and this is what I found. And I didn't have to go looking any further than that. So there are problems across the board. We all need to improve on this. So so don't feel bad because everybody's kind of making these same errors and mistakes. So example number 1 was this job. And so I guess my first question on example number 1 is, as you look at this, so the recommended measure says that they're going to replace Windows 6 and 7. And there is a diagram. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And the auditor has labeled the windows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It looks like these 2 windows, 6 and 7, I'm assuming those are the windows that the audit is calling for replacement on them. So let's take a look at the test, possibly, if I can zoom around here. Can you tell me from the test if windows number 6 and 7 have lead on them? You guys able to see that well enough?
Yeah, I can see it. I'm having a hard time telling which windows got lead.
Yeah, in this case, so I can see that there are, like clear over here to the right, it does say that what the component was, window or door. And I think here in the middle, it tells you which room was tested. So it says that, let me scroll this around a little bit. Hopefully you guys can see this. So it says there's windows, a couple of windows that were tested, and they were in the living room. And then there was a couple of doors that were tested, or different parts of the door that were tested, maybe, that were also in a living room. And then there were some windows that were tested, and they were outside, and then a bathroom ceiling was tested. So from this sketch and from other documentation in this file and from photos of the house, I can tell that there are 11 windows on this house. How many windows were tested? Anybody want to venture a guess on that one?
Looks like 8.
So there were 8 lead tests on surfaces of windows, but how do we know how many windows were tested? Because some of them were tested, 4 of them were tested, no, 3 of them were tested from inside the living room, possibly, and 4 or 5 of them were tested from outside. But I have no idea if that was the same windows that were tested in the living room or if it was other windows. But if this is the complete test, which this is what was in the file, then this test documents that this auditor did not lead test all 11 windows. And back to my original question, how can you tell if Windows 6 or 7 have lead on them? So this is one example. Does anybody else see any issues with this lead test? There's one other glaring problem with it. Gold star to the person who can find it.
No name.
That's actually, I've noticed on all of them there tends to be no name.
No pre or post calibration?
That's,
Oh, you beat me to it.
that was what I was looking for. Yeah, there's no pre or post calibration. What's the problem with that?
Don't calibrate, your readings could be off.
Yeah. So the book that you each got when you went and took your lead tester class, in chapter 5, it actually has some language in there that says that lead tests without pre and post calibration are basically useless because you have no idea if the instrument was calibrated properly. So yeah, you got to have pre and post calibration on all of your tests. All right, let's look at another one real quick. So here's example number 2. And I'm going to zoom in. So the recommended measures said that we're going to replace Windows E1, W2, W1, E3, and E2. The site sketch in the file has them labeled as E1, E2, E3. So it looks like these are on the back of the house, and W1 and W2 on the front of the house. It also shows a handful of basement windows. And then here's the test. So my first question on this one is, how many windows were tested? So anybody able to answer that one, speak up. Man. Ian, I saw that you texted something, but I can't get my GoToMeeting to let me see it.
4.
Yeah, so I'm seeing 4 window tests here. And I know there's more than 4 windows on the house, and I can see that there's more than 4 windows being called for on the recommended measures report. Now, on the 4 windows that they tested, they all came up negative. So is this sufficient? Does anybody see any problems with this? What is the
Any
problem?
window getting replaced should be retested.
Yeah, so we should be seeing at least 5 windows tested on here, right? Because there are 5 windows listed on the recommended measures. Just because you've tested 4 of the windows and they all came back negative, you cannot go and replace that 5th window. You have to actually test all of the windows and make sure that they're lead-free. What about the basement windows? In this case, I really like what the auditor did here. I feel like it was a very smart thing that they did. I don't know if you can see it, but they made a note down here about the basement windows. It says the basement windows don't meet egress. So this auditor knew that they wouldn't be able to replace the basement windows, and therefore it was not necessary to test them, because even when he got back to the office and ran the audit, they wouldn't be able to swap them out. So the lead test, or the time to take the lead test on that window, was not necessary.
And 2, Turner, everybody needs to think about when they're, say on that 5th window that they need to replace, you need to test all the components that are going to be disturbed, like the casing around the window or the window sill, and maybe more than one test for each window, and then the outside, you know, your trim outside that may be disturbed. So you may have 2 or 3 tests just for one window to verify all the components.
Yeah. So here is the 3rd example. possibly, if I can zoom around. Sorry to make y'all dizzy. Now, this is one where I used this specific audit because I found that this auditor is doing a fantastic job of documenting some stuff. And then I had to doctor the actual XRF test because even this auditor was not quite doing what we need to be doing. So I took the closest example of what I could, what we ought to be doing, and I tweaked it a little bit to make it show what we really need to be doing, or at least an example of what we need to be doing. So hang on, I got to read a note here. Yeah, so that's, Ian had mentioned the same thing that Dalton was just talking about, that basically you've got to actually test all the components. It's typically not just one surface or another. My goodness, I cannot get my GoToMeeting thing out of my way. It's not working well. Okay, so this example here, the recommended measure shows that we're doing some low E windows. We're going to do window H, window A, and window C. And I'm going to have to zoom in on this a little bit because it's typed, but this is exactly what the auditor had in his file. So this auditor is actually labeling each window like many of you do, and each door, and doing it in a very clean, uniform way. Even over here where he audited, I think on the audit he put both of them in as just window A and said there's two windows, but he labeled them individually as A1 and A2 so that he could clearly differentiate, from one window to the other. But so taking that information, so it looks like we have windows A through H, and there's two A's. So what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 windows and 2 doors on this house. And we know we're replacing 3 of them. And then here's the example of his lead test. So how's this looking? I'm going to zoom in over here for just a minute, maybe. So you can see after his calibration, he started testing, and he did a test on not just a window, but window casing. And I think over somewhere else it tells you whether he was inside or outside. And then further down the list, when you get to the get toward the bottom, then he starts naming which room he was in. But so he's got window casing, and this is the part that I doctored, and this is where everybody needs to find a way to do something like this. Is that I'm taking the labeling system that he used off of his sketch, and I'm adding it here to the description. So he listed that he had tested a window, and it was on the west side of the house, and it was on the outside. But if you look at the sketch, there are 2 windows on the west side of the house. So I still don't know which window he tested until I actually put A1 in front of it and A2. And door casing, I need to know if it's door 1 or door 2 or door 4 or whatever. Because here, again, we got a door that had lead on it. Now, in the door, in this case, I can actually tell because it is on the west side of the house, and that's the only door that was on the west side of the house. But in a lot of instances, you can't. So I need everybody to get into the good practice of finding a way to clearly identify which door, which window, which wall, which component they're testing. This is something that they talked about at length during your lead testing training, but they kept throwing in that caveat that, if you're not conducting a full lead test, then this may not apply. We're not conducting a full lead test, but there are still aspects of it that do apply, and this is one of them. So B, window casing, window C, window casing. So I think hopefully you get the point on that. That's really what we need to do. We need to find a way to more clearly identify these things. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts or concerns on this? Is what I'm asking you to do possible, feasible? All right. The other thing I want to talk about for a minute is this one. In the lead rule, in EPA's lead rule, there's some language in there, and I have been confused about it. And I suspect there may be a little bit of confusion in the program about it. So I wanted to see if we can clarify that a little bit. And the confusion that I've had for quite a while is the difference between renovation and a minor repair. I think a lot of you may be aware of this rule that basically if you disrupt 6 square feet or less of the painted surface of a room, or 20 square feet or less of a painted surface of exterior activities, then you basically don't need to do any RRP on it. Well, that only applies to minor repairs. In the lead rule, they have a definition of things that are being renovated or renovation, and all of the lead stuff applies to renovation. If you are renovating something, you have to lead test it. You have to do the RRP when you find lead. If anything falls under the definition of a minor repair, then you don't have to do those things. But it's important to note that most of what we do is renovation. When I was thinking about, well, how could you streamline this test? How could you make it easier so that we're spending less time on the job? I immediately thought, well, if we're going to do a drill and fill and it's less than 6 square feet, then you know, if you know that, then you don't have to test that. But that is wrong. If you read through the definition of a renovation, it says that the modification of any existing structure or portion thereof that results in the disturbance of painted surfaces. The term renovate includes the removal, modification, or repair of painted surfaces or painted components. Examples of this are painted doors, surface restoration, window repair, surface prep activities such as sanding, scraping, or other activities that may generate dust, the removal of building components such as walls, ceiling, plumbing, windows, and weatherization projects. So renovation means weatherization projects, like cutting holes in painted surfaces to install blown-in insulation, or to gain access to attics, or to plane a threshold to install weather stripping. So renovation is when you're drilling holes into a wall to blow in insulation. The term renovate does not include minor repairs and maintenance activities. So, and then down under a minor repair, that's where we get that rule. The maintenance activities are activities that include minor heating, ventilation or air conditioning work, electric work, and plumbing that disrupts 6 square feet or less per room, or 20 square feet or less of painted surface on exterior activities, and where the work does not involve window replacement or demolition of painted surfaces, and when removing painted components, the portion of all those components would be the entire surface area. And then basically if you have to add everything up in a period of 30 days, and if it exceeds that, then it turns into renovation. So, so here's my question. Is this one a renovation or a minor repair?
Renovation.
Yeah,
Renovation.
we just covered it. How about this one?
Renovation.
Can this one ever be a minor repair?
No.
No.
No. If we are removing painted components from the house, and replacing them with other ones, even if it's a door slab and we're going to pop the hinges off, it falls under renovation because we're removing the component from the house. Now, if you can remove that door slab without disturbing any of the paint, then, you know, you may not necessarily need to do containment and things like that on it, but it falls under the definition of renovation. What about this one? I'm going to go back to the definition. Let's see if you can tell me what this one is. So we're taking out an old fan, we're going to cut a little bit of drywall, and we're going to install an ASHRAE fan. Is it renovation or repair?
For the renovation, you've got the sanding and scraping of existing.
Yeah. Anybody want to make an argument for minor repair?
If you're replacing an original bath fan with the ASHRAE fan.
Yeah. I think, and this, I wish there was clearer language. I've seen a lot of opinions and frequently asked questions about this kind of stuff. But really, if it came right down to it, this is what we will be held to. This does say that minor repair and maintenance activities, including minor heating, ventilation, or air conditioning work, electrical work, and plumbing, fall under this. So I could see us making a decent argument for swapping out an ASHRAE fan under minor repair. But doing a drill and fill, I don't think we have a leg to stand on. So anybody feel strongly otherwise on that one? Ultimately, you as the lead inspector and you as the lead renovator are the ones that will be held responsible to follow this. So use your best judgment. But if I go into a home and the ceiling on that bath fan is not lead tested and there's minor work done on it, I'm probably not going to have any major heartburn over it. If I go in and see major work, or if there was other major work to where we exceeded the 6 square feet, when you add that into the equation, then that's where we run into a little bit of trouble. So this one could really go both ways. If you're doing other lead safe work on the house, you might as well test this and do some RRP on it. So, but yeah, so I wanted to talk about time-saving strategies. I wish that I had like some, magical equation for this, but I had hoped to say, you don't have to lead test when you're doing a drill and fill, but then I started reading stuff and learned that I was wrong. So here's a couple of things that that we have noticed or we have talked about that may work in some instances. The first one is when travel is minimal. If you're 5 minutes from the office, you could consider running the audit, going back to the office, running the audit, determining which windows need to be tested or which doors or other components need to be tested, and then going back to the house and testing just those components. That could help minimize the amount of time you're spending on a job. The other one would be that don't test windows that won't audit for replacement. Windows that do not meet egress, or if the window is a double pane low E window and it's tight, that one, our guidelines, as long as they're both double pane and low E, our guidelines say you do not have to replace them. So even if you got back to the office and those things audited, you can still say we are not replacing them because they're double pane and low E. The next one is that you always want to test your uninsulated walls. This would be a time-saving strategy, meaning that you don't have to go back after you forgot to do it. And you want to test both sides. Why would you want to test both sides of an uninsulated wall? Why would it be a good idea to test both sides of an uninsulated wall?
So where you drill and fill on either side,
Yeah, you got, if you found lead on one side and no lead on the other side, now you got options, right? So yeah, you got to determine where you're going to drill and fill. You could save your agency a lot of time and money by picking the side without lead. And if lead is found, you don't have to test every window. Oh, where was it?
You just have to do lead safe on every one that is replaced.
Yeah, if your strategy is to just do lead safe on every window, shoot, I have an example of this if I can get my screen to zoom around where I want it to. You don't have to test every window. If you get to a house and there's 15 windows and you can tell they are all installed the same, you can lead test 1 or 2 windows. If you find lead on those 1 or 2 windows, you don't have to keep testing the other 14 windows if you know you're going to have to do lead safe work on all of them. So if you run into that, just document what you're doing. If I got to the lead inspection report, I saw that there was lead and there was like 1 window and, you know, the interior components and the exterior components of that 1 window were tested. And then I saw a note here that said something like this. So these are the measures that would require lead safe. And it says all windows to be replaced are going to require lead safe because lead was found on the interior sash and the exterior casing of window C. Only window C was tested. All other windows had similar paint. Assume all windows have lead. That's just an example of how you could document that to show what you're doing. So, does anybody else have any other time-saving strategies or questions about, you know, can I do this or that to try and save time? All right. Then last thing, and I know Dalton, it won't be too long for those of you who are still hanging on. We just wanted to cover what needs to go in the file when you do have to do RRP work. So Dalton, you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so we kind of hit on this already when Turner was going through the guidelines, but you need to make sure you have the declaration and checklist filled out. You want to have the signed renovator. His name needs to be on there and any of the trainees that he has helping him. Make sure they fill in all the boxes correctly. It's pretty self-explanatory. We need to have a copy of the certification from your lead renovator in the file. And then we need photos of the containment, both interior and exterior. So make sure you guys are doing that. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. So, do you guys have any questions on documentation?
Any other questions on anything lead? Or anything else that you'd like to see us cover on lead in the future? I know lead's an exciting topic. All right.
I have a question really quick. So do you just want this card scanned into the client file that shows who did the work?
The signed renovator, just a copy of their license. Like you can take a photocopy of their license and just put it in the file.
Only if they're doing lead safe work, or even for when they're testing for lead?
Just when they're doing the lead work.
Okay.
So during our monitorings, we'll check jobs that have been lead tested, and we'll check the inspector's certification to make sure they were current at the time that they did that inspection. So we do that kind of separately, but when it's required to have a photo documentation of their certification is when some work. So
you want the renovator's license, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Whoever the signed renovator is
Okay.
for that job. So
That's I may be making a slight modification to the lead report form because one of the other things I came across is that the EPA rule actually requires that the lead, if you're a lead inspector and you're putting a test together, you're supposed to put your lead inspector number on the test. So I may be adding a blank on that form in the near future for that. But yeah, they require, is it required to have a copy of this in the file? Is that just, or could they put a number, or do you know, Dalton?
It says a copy of their certificate, I think, in the guidelines, so.
Okay. Yeah, that's what we're seeing out there. That's, Dalton already answered.
Yeah.
Just a copy of that in the file when you're doing lead renovation.
Because we kind of want to have on that, because this declaration, we can see the date on it, and we want to make sure that renovator was, I think, current then. So just a copy of the whole certificate where it shows the expiration dates and stuff.
Yeah.
Is good, so.
Cool.
Can we do it with the file?
All right, any other questions before we end? Well, thank you guys for attending. Hopefully you got something helpful out of this, but please do what you can to kind of make some of those improvements where we need to, and have a great day. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Thanks.